started, I guess. Yeah,
No,
we're
I'm
live
starting
now.
now. Yeah, so I'm here with Lively Atheist. I know that the hangout and the broadcast this afternoon was supposed to be on Islam and Islamic history, but there was a cancellation. So instead, I'm using this time to, or what remains of it, to, I guess, have a discussion on technocracy. So if you tuned in to watch Islam and you got technocracy, well, I guess you know how it is to watch Reza Aslan. So, uh, great. So I guess this will be very fast since, because of the delay, I don't have a full allotment to do a complete discussion. But do you want to introduce yourself, Lively Atheist, and we can just have a brief discussion on your ideas about technocracy, and I'll ask some questions?
Sure. Sure. Let me begin by introducing myself. I am Lively Atheist. You can find me on Twitter as Lively Atheist. I have two YouTube channels. One is the 50 Shades of Liberty, and the other one is. So
did I lose?
I kind of came into the cultural war almost 2 years ago, but I didn't really have a side until last year.
Mm-hmm.
And I just came across technocracy, and I was like, this is a thing that I could least object against.
Yeah. So can you explain technocracy as you see it?
So technocracy, there's different layers to it. There is the libertarian side to it, and there is the authoritarian side to it. And then there is a democratic side of it. In general, the principle of technocracy is giving some power, giving more voice to people who are educated on the issues that we are having to deal with in hand.
Can you give me an example of that?
For example, let's say a scientific study discovers that a practice leads to some kind of bad consequence, like genetic consequence. Let's say inbreeding, for example, incest, breeding within ancestry.
Yeah.
And let's say that the community standard against that. Like most people, you would.
Okay. I mean, most people associate the word technocrat with people like in the EU and in the IMF and stuff like that.
Okay.
International Monetary Fund, World Bank, EU, Trilateral Commission. Those are what people oftentimes associate as being technocrats. I imagine those people would be given larger voice to make policy in countries as opposed to elected representatives because they're the experts, for instance.
Yeah. IMF, for example, has a higher standing because it has who are educated on the issue of economics, and they determine the lives of all
and the
of almost
EU
everyone.
has people educated on the issue of government, right? Or at least they claim to.
But then there's but the problem comes when you have the difference between an ideal technocracy and the EU type of technocracy is that interest. For example, a real technocracy would be interested in whatever will lead to much more scientific advancement and much more stability.
I think the EU is interested in scientific advancement. What makes you think that they're not? I don't think that's the problem people have with them.
No, they are much more. They're not interested in outcomes as much in scientific outcomes and stability as much as the way they are interested in maintaining their political agenda.
Can you explain what you mean by scientific outcomes and stability?
Well, they would know that the immigration crisis would have a bad outcome in that society. It would lead to much more money being wasted on other issues.
That say it won't. This is the problem, right?
I think it's very solid though. That like they can't. You could just
like for instance, if I went to the University of Sociology departments in my country and in most European universities, they would be overwhelmingly pro-migration.
That's
overwhelmingly.
Because
I'm talking about 95% to 99% would be for. That's a higher consensus than you get in any scientific department over really any controversial proposition.
The thing though, I don't view sociology and the social sciences as a science. For the most part, they have.
But this is a problem, right? Because then what do you mean by technocracy? Is economics a science?
elites like physicists and statisticians and IMF type of elites, like the ones who have a background in economics, making decisions about economics, and then the ones who have a
Who makes
background in
political
something
decisions
else.
then?
Decisions will be, for the most part, will be left up to the public.
But that's not technocracy then, isn't it? That's democracy or republicanism.
But here's the thing, though: in democracy, everyone has an equal voice on everything. But in this kind of
in radical democracy that nobody does, right? Almost all countries are republics, not democracies.
Let me think. Yeah, there's somewhat a difference. Like you'd make the case that there is. If there is a case for plutocracy in some parts of the Western world, where the ruling elite have much more voice than the average person. Other means.
Well, I would say that the IMF is a plutocracy. Good or not, it is a plutocracy. There may be good reasons for plutocracy, but it is a plutocracy.
I would agree with that for the most part, because you see it from most of the economic decisions it makes, pretty much world economy in a way. Like,
so I guess
something about like.
Can I ask a more pointed question? What change on the current system are you proposing? Essentially, are you saying that the IMF should have more government powers, or that modern government should be more like the IMF?
I'm saying that national government should be much more like the IMF, but centered towards making policies that.
So they should be more plutocratic. So how more like
this way? Power to the ones with the wealth, whereas technocracy gives power to the ones with the knowledge.
Who has the knowledge to run the government? That's the question. The current people who are claiming this are sociologists and academics who study social science. Those are the people who are predominantly claiming the right. Those are the people who are claiming to be experts in government.
We'll probably need to have a battle of ideas to decide who is better fit to run the system.
Who decides that? I guess
you would have. It would be necessary to have an open dialogue amongst all academics from all background and emotions aside, and have a logical discussion. And open to that kind of discussion.
I'm not so sure that's ever happened. I mean,
I'm saying in my ideal world, I'm not living in the real world right now in a way.
This is the problem with this sort of idea of technocracy, is that, well, there's two main problems. The first one is the one we're running into right now, which is you've got no idea of figuring out who is an expert at ruling. There's not unlike economics or unlike physics, there isn't. I mean, economics is questionable, but certainly physics. There isn't some discipline that's called ruling that people can major in and that we can like train people in. And there's a peer-reviewed process for ruling and government. That the closest we have to that is sociology. But we see from sociology departments that, well, really, they have no control over the ideas that come out of them and no consequence for getting ideas wrong ever. So
yeah,
you don't have any, and without that, the academic community never come to better answers, and they just form into little cliques. I mean, the second thing that I think is the big problem with technocracy is that the problem with government isn't that they don't have the right information. The problem is that people don't trust that they're working in their best interests. And what assurance do you have that the interests of the people are being taken into account by experts?
Okay, for me, let me say this. The interest of the people is not the big thing that I have in mind. What I have in mind for the most part is that policy of said policy being proposed, and
consequences
I believe that the consequences to everyone else, because believing in ideas, but then they don't know the consequence of those ideas. I mean, if you genuinely went and asked a Marxist about what they believe in,
but
their belief.
Well, what do you mean? The Marxists claim to be scientists, right? Marxists were technocrats to a certain degree. They claim that Marxism was a scientific model for government, and that was the justification for their.
They don't believe in two kinds of myths. One of them are, some of them are crazy anarcho-Marxists.
Dialectic materialism was supposed to be scientific.
Okay, I mean, it's not really scientific though. Like,
well, we don't think it is.
You can't come to a conclusion about it being the best form of government when every time it has been tried.
I think I just lost you here. Are you still there?
I say that you can't scientifically say that it's the best form of government when as a system of government repeatedly.
Well, yeah, but this is the problem, right? Despite it failing repeatedly, it's still very popular among academics, which further underlines the case that there's no academic way to get to what the best form of government is or the best thing to do in government from an academic point of view. It's not a very well-structured scientific question.
I mean, we could focus on let's see, instead of using sociology, for example, we could go to other areas. We could give the branch of sociology and hand it into biologists in a way, and they could study the behavior patterns of human in terms of administration and everything like that.
But you're just changing the name of the problem. The problem is that the question itself can't be answered with high certainty. If you just make the biologist ask the same question, he's not going to be able to magically import the certainty of biology. The uncertainty attaches to the question, not the field that we use to answer it.
I mean, here's one of the problem, but the other problem with the question is the field, because if you've been to most social sciences, they have the idea of viewing the world through a lens, just through pure reality, I guess.
Science has a lens. Every set of ideas has a lens that you view the world through.
I mean, okay, but the scientific method is the best method that has ever been proven.
It limits its. I have a whole talk on this called the cult of confidence. The reason why it's very reliable is that it limits the number of questions that can be asked, right? So that's it. The certainty of science is manufactured by the fact that it only focuses on questions that can be answered with a very, very high probability and a very, very empirical result. So there are many questions that are just not scientific questions whatsoever. For instance, any imperative question cannot be a properly posed scientific question, period.
Makes sense to some degree. But then okay, but here's the thing though. If you sociology and other sciences too, normal sciences, you will inevitably have the consequence of remaining with the status quo, kind of a bunch of bullcrap being taught as fact in
what do you
academics,
mean?
In academia.
How we've done government in the past is we've developed sort of rules of thumb from previous historical observations that are not themselves scientific. So, for instance, we have principles that are handed down that a government should, defend its borders, right? We didn't have scientific experiments that demonstrated that nations that didn't defend their borders failed, but it's received traditional wisdom that this is the case. Now, and we don't have scientific experiments to do that because you couldn't possibly create a scientific experiment to demonstrate that. So what we're talking about a non-scientific way of knowing things, I guess.
I mean, you could say that it's scientific in a way because they could see, in their day-to-day life, they could see the battles going on, within countries, from country to country.
That's anecdotal, though.
Kind of anecdotal, but there is also
lively
historical evidence for
that. Strictly speaking, lively. It's not, if you just excerpt anecdotes and say what we see from history, blah and blah, it's not actually a scientific process you're going through. You're calling it scientific because you think it's part of reality, but it's not scientific if it's not controlled. So we're really just asserting something that's scientific but not scientific. It's like what the Marxists did, right? And we saw the consequences of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to replicate. I could see your point. It's almost difficult, like you can't go and replicate the Holocaust to prove it,
Yes.
Like,
I mean,
there are some things that you can't go back and do. You can't go for it. So
the problem here, though, is like, okay, I think I'll just talk now. Look, the problem here, Lively, is that this technocracy idea does not have a very good track record, unfortunately. The dominant technocratic philosophy, the idea that science can determine government, is communism. That was the first one that was seriously tried. It was tried over and over and over again. There was an overwhelming consensus among scientific experts and intellectuals that this was the correct idea. It didn't work. Now we're moving on to, now if you went to the academia and asked them what their best form of government would be, you'd get, you get some combination of SJW cultural Marxists and neoliberal EU bureaucrats. But I think we all know that those ideas of governments have serious problems with them.
It depends on what you mean by neoliberal.
Because
the neoliberal economics isn't really that much bad.
Pardon me?
Neoliberal economics, I don't really hate neoliberal economics in a way.
I think there's some problems with it.
Yeah, there's some
flaws
with
it. It's not as bad as Marxism, I guess. But would you support neoliberal economics with uncontrolled mass immigration? Because that's currently what the academic authorities in the university systems are overwhelmingly in favor of right now.
Let's see. So even if on the immigration crisis, I would rather have taking care of it. So in a way, I would probably be in favor of it being privatized. So I would probably be neoliberal in that. If people want immigrants, they should pay money and fund themselves and not make it a burden of the taxpayers.
How does that even work? These countries have programs that apply to everybody. So I'm not so sure how that would work, I guess.
For example, in the United States and most parts of the world, the biggest takers of immigrants are charities, I guess.
Pardon me?
Organizations. Like the biggest immigration takers in the biggest groups that welcome immigrants in the United States are called Catholic charities.
Well, they take care of most immigrants, but what do you mean? Even if there weren't Catholic charities, they could still get payments from the government.
They do get some payment from the government, but it's most of the money they get is from charity. It's from religious people.
Okay. So in Europe, for instance, though, most of them these immigrant communities are almost fully funded by the government. I think the United States is an exception because much more of our aid comes from private charities. But in countries with the government, then it comes from the government.
In Europe, they should privatize it. And
they should totally privatize their charity?
Yeah. Their immigration charity. Then that will just reduce the number of immigrants coming in.
So you're not going to give immigrants access to welfare and healthcare in Europe?
Yeah, just make it privatized and then
I'm not so sure what privatized means. If you don't give immigrants health care and welfare, there's going to be a mass humanitarian crisis in Europe right now.
Also, by privatize, I mean
hold on. Let's deal with that fact before you go on. If the EU passes that it's not going to give health care to the million or welfare to the million immigrants that are currently in its borders, there's going to be a mass humanitarian crisis in Western Europe.
But then it would make it less ideal to move to there for people who are thinking about moving to there.
I don't understand what you're saying. I'm sorry. You mean
For
it's going to
example,
disincentivize?
if I was someone in Syria watching the humanitarian crisis happening there, then I would look for another place to go instead of going to there.
Oh yeah, I'm sure, but I mean, there's going to be a massive crisis in your borders, even with that. It's not going to necessarily solve all. First of all, the great irony of this is that all the technocrats from the IMF and the European Union that we were praising to the high heavens at the beginning of this conversation would be utterly opposed to the solution you just proposed. Secondly, although you are correct that this mechanism of privatizing all benefits to immigrants would in fact disincentivize immigrants from coming, it still wouldn't help you deal with the fact that you're going to have millions of people inside the EU borders who are going to have no food or health care and will lash out at people around them in order to get those things.
I guess in a way it would increase, like you'd also have to create employment opportunities for the ones that already exist there.
How are you going to do that? No one's figured out how to do that yet, right?
I mean, just create some bullshit state job or something like that. It's like just.
I don't know why would I privatize healthcare and then just give the immigrant money to do nothing because it's a make work job. It seems like you're just doing the same thing. You're proposing the identical policy as exists in the present system. All you're saying is that, do this job that we don't need done with skills that you don't have, and we'll cut you a check and give you health care. But at the end of the day, it's still the same problem, right?
You give them very little benefit. You give them much less benefit than the one they have right now.
I don't know, man.
And also, privatization doesn't really anything. It just means that you will get money from those who want to give you only.
I'm not so sure that this is, I mean, it seems to me like you want to have it both ways. You want to give people money who are in the country to live for not doing anything of economic value, and you simultaneously don't want to give them money. I can't tell which it is, right?
Okay, wait. Let me rephrase it this way. But privatizing it doesn't really mean cutting it. It just means that.
No, I understand that, but privatizing does mean cutting it from the government.
Yeah, from the government, yeah. But then you say that you could lead to
humanitarian crisis. Charity organizations ready to take the government's slack off like the United States does. It takes years for private charities to get the ground.
You'd probably use state money to start the charity and then leave it up to the people all the time.
I don't even know what this is going to solve, though, right? I mean, this is going to create mass chaos right now in Europe. And I am not so sure what we get for it, I guess.
I mean, it would have chaos in the short term, but then it would have stability in the long term. Because people will realize how much burden they were putting on the government.
So basically, you want to create incentives for immigrants to leave. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, you could create an incentive for them to leave.
Okay, and also that's effectively what you're doing, and we could find ways to do that wouldn't involve leading to a mass humanitarian crisis or gutting the European welfare state and pissing off their native populations. I mean, I think that might be possible. We could debate it, whether it is possible. I will point out at this point that the solution you just proposed is incredibly unpopular from the technocratic perspective.
I know. It's me, and I guess C.S. Mikta used to agree with me on this. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And so it's like, it doesn't mean
this is not the technocratic perspective, because the academic, cultural, and scientific elites disagree with you on this point. So you can't say technocracy is the answer.
I think they have not yet seen the tip of the snow. Like, they're still asleep, on the issue of immigration. But once they get their wake-up call and the PC culture begins dying, they'll probably come to that conclusion.
But here, notice a key thing you're saying here. You're saying that people on the ground understand things better than detached experts. But that seems like it's at its core the refutation of technocracy in its entirety. You know,
I mean, I don't think
people
that
who
most of
actually
them
have
are.
experience with this know better than the technocrats do. That's what we're saying right now.
I don't
I
think
mean, has
that
there been a bigger issue than immigration in the last 30 years? I don't think there has been for Europe.
I mean, here's the thing though, but the technocrats, I don't think they're really stupid and don't understand it. It's just that they don't want to like displease the public. I guess they want to just fit in with the public and
No, the
pretend as
public
if
is
they're not aware of
anti-immigrant
it.
for the most part.
I don't think the public is really, even if it's anti-immigrant,
But
but
that's
the
what
culture
I've heard you say that
is
it.
very pro-immigration. They want to fit in within the culture that's very politically correct.
I mean, I have to keep an eye on the time, like I said. But I appreciate this perspective. I sympathize with some things, but I think the fundamental problem is here is, well, the EU bureaucrats, the technocrats, are more pro-immigration than their population is. So they can't very well be getting their pro-immigration stance. Hold on, they can't very well be getting their pro-immigration stance from a desire to appeal to their populations, because their populations are against it. So they're essentially going in the opposite direction that you want to. And it seems like we agree that the population, because they are more on the ground, they can actually get what they can actually get things that detached technocrats can't understand.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like I guess it's also the class standing, I guess. I don't think that most of the immigrants would be in places that would have impact on the technocrats as much as the way they would on the working class and the lower class level individuals.
But this is the reason why technocracy fails, because technocrats, while they have an understanding of a few aspects of things like economics, thoroughly don't understand how life is for people who actually live in smaller communities. They don't understand the lived reality of the people on the ground. Therefore, they make mistakes like this all the time.
Maybe I should consider this. Maybe I should consider changing my hypothesis.
Well, actually, I said this would be a very short stream. Maybe we'll close Technocracy, and you can just tell me a little bit about your channel and what you want to do before we sign off. Like I said, I apologize to the watchers. I had sort of set out a 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. window for a longer debate. That didn't happen, and I had this time cleared, so I decided to invite Lively on for a very, very quick discussion. Are you mainly what are your main YouTube interests? Do you just want to lay them out very
Usually,
quickly?
I just have discussions with my friends. So it's like
Pardon me?
I do have several friends from Facebook and Twitter, and I bring them in and we talk about and
Cool. That's awesome.
One of my friends is. What's funny is that one of my friends is a Marxist, and he's very anti-SJW. That's the funny thing with him. And then the other one is a liberal, not like the modern day type of liberal. He's more of the old school type of liberal.
Yeah, I know what you mean. The classical liberal stuff.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds really fun. I mean, I really I feel like we could have had a much longer discussion, and I'm gonna have to cut it a little bit short. But thank you so much for coming on and discussing Technocracy. This is probably going to be like the shortest live stream ever on my channel, but it's just the constraints of my schedule. So,
all right. Take care, man.
All right. Thanks a lot for appearing. Have a good one.
You too.
Bye.